What really makes a great UFC champion? Attributes like speed, power, and durability obviously play a part, but how a champion and a fighter in general utilizes these skills matters more. How might we look at how a fighter uses these skills? Well, the most obvious way is to look at their resume. What have these fighters accomplished? What type of fighters have they defeated? Today, we're going to go through every single UFC weight division and take a look at these resumes to decide whether or not these fighters have any sorts of holes in their game, or potentially if they've been able to skip an entire style of fighter on their way to the belt. So how are we going to rate these UFC champions' resumes? I have 4 criteria. Number 1, have they dealt with a power puncher? Number 2, have they dealt with a wrestler? Number 3, have they dealt with a submission threat? And number 4, have they fought their way back to a win? This means that they were losing and were able to reverse the tide. These are my 4 criteria for our UCF official fraud checklist. What is a fraud check? A fraud check is when a fighter is checked to see if they have abilities that they claim to. A great example would be a fighter claiming that they can deal with anyone's power and immediately getting knocked out. That would be a fraud check. I'm also adding 2 extra pieces of information to help us round out this picture of a UFC champion. These are the fighter's best win within the UFC, as well as the fighter's last loss. The best win will give you an idea of just who they've been able to deal with, and their last loss would show you their limitations. Who they lost to last can tell you a lot about a fighter. Now let's start. We will be starting with the UFC heavyweight division. Our interim champion, Tom Aspinall. Heavyweight is a strange division to try to rate skill and ability within, but let's do our best anyways. So Tom Aspinall has fought a power puncher. The best example would be his last fight against Sergey Pavlovich. Heavyweight is almost exclusively a division of power punchers, so he checks that one off very quickly and easily. Number 2, has he dealt with a wrestler? Yes, but with a caveat. He has fought Curtis Blades, the premier wrestler at heavyweight, but he also lost that fight due to an injury that he suffered almost immediately in the first round. He is set to rematch Curtis Blades, and whether or not he wins that fight will tell us whether or not he can deal with a wrestler. He has not dealt with a submission threat, as there really just aren't that many submission threats at heavyweight. Tom Aspinall himself may be one of them. Jailton Almeida would be a second one, but they're just not out there. And a 4th criteria, of course, is whether or not he's been able to fight his way back to a win. The answer is no, and that's not entirely Tom Aspinall's fault. He just hasn't run into that much trouble at heavyweight. The talent at heavyweight is very shallow, and Tom is at the deep end of the division. Now, looking at Tom's last loss, like I said earlier, that was a loss to Curtis Blades. He injured his ACL or his MCL in that fight. It ended early. They're running that one back. We're going to find out whether or not that loss to Curtis Blades is really going to say a whole bunch about Tom Aspinall or not. Obviously, if he goes in there and knocks out Curtis Blades, we can check off wrestler from that list. And his best win in the division, I'm going to say easily, is Sergey Pavlovich. Pavlovich was the destroyer, the monster at heavyweight, the premier power puncher, knocking out guys like the Derek Lewis. And this was where Sergey was made to look human, was against Tom Aspinall. Aspinall gets that KO in round number 1, showing himself to basically be the biggest puncher in the division. That's an awesome win. Overall, Tom Aspinall's resume looking awesome in the UFC, especially for heavyweight. We really just have to wait and see how this Curtis Blades fight goes to decide whether or not he has that well-rounded game. Moving down to light heavyweight, we have the most recent UFC champion to fight, Alex Poatan Pereira. Now, let's go down this list. Has he dealt with a power puncher? Abso-fucking-lutely. He's just defeated one of the best power punchers at light heavyweight twice, almost back-to-back. He beat Jiri Prochazka twice in his last 3 fights, and the other person that he fought at light heavyweight in this title picture, another former champion, Jamal Hill, also a power puncher. If there's one type of UFC fighter that we know Alex Pereira can deal with, it's a power puncher. Has he dealt with a wrestler? I'm going to put a question mark beside this one because he did beat Jan Blachowicz. But Jan is much more of a well-rounded fighter. When Jan won the belt, it wasn't with wrestling. It was by knocking out Dominic Reyes. Now, when Jan beat Israel Adesanya, by example, he did employ more of the wrestling. So I'm gonna give him, the question mark there because, yes, that's a little bit of wrestling. There was also his fight against Andrius Michailidis, where he was controlled throughout round number 1 with wrestling. We have not actually seen Alex Pereira deal with a wrestler. That's rough. Moving down, has he dealt with a submission threat? The answer is still no. Moving down, has he fought his way back to a win? Yes, he has. In that first fight with Israel Adesanya, where he knocks Adesanya out, he is not winning that fight up until the moment that he gets the KO. And I think a lot of the time people forget that. Now, the fight was back and forth, but Adesanya was winning most of that fight, and Poatan dug deep to be able to get that win back. Now, looking at his last loss, wow, Israel Adesanya. Looking at his best win, wow, Israel Adesanya. These two are just linked. They have been since they were both kickboxing. Famously, Pereira had 2 wins over Izzy in kickboxing. They're now 1-1 in MMA. They're probably going to fight a third time eventually. Look forward to it. Pereira is a deadly striker, but truth be told, we just don't know if he can grapple at all. At 185 pounds, our current champion is Dricus du Plessis, still knocks. Has Dricus dealt with a power puncher? Yes, he has. I'm willing to say many. Robert Whittaker is not just a power puncher, and I don't think that's what defines him, but to say that he does not have power in both hands is to not have, you just haven't watched his career. Dricus du Plessis has also dealt with Derek Brunson. He has, middleweight is a division of power punchers. It has been for a long time, and that's why it has historically been ruled by slick counter punchers, is because you just wait for the power puncher to come in and destroy them. That's not how Dricus fights, because Dricus is one of these power punchers. Has he dealt with a wrestler? Yes, he has. Derek Brunson. Has he dealt with a submission threat? No, he has not. But there's just not really that pedigree of jiu-jitsu ace at 185. Has he dealt with trouble and come back to win? Yes, he has. The Sean Strickland fight, I think, is the perfect example. Dricus was getting chewed up throughout that entire fight. And then, going into round number 5, he's still advancing. He's still throwing punches. Just a guy that cannot be deterred so long as he's still thinking. What is his last loss? Most of you are not going to know who Roberto Soldic is, but if you know who he is, you know that that's not a terrible loss. And another thing to consider is that before he lost to him, Dricus knocked him out. So these guys just traded KOs with one another on the regional scene. That's another note, is that Dricus has not lost in the UFC. That this is a loss that he took while he was still on the regional scene. His best win, I think, is easily Robert Whittaker. We just recently watched what Robert is still capable of, and the punch that actually hurt Whittaker on the feet in that fight was just a stray jab. And I think that really speaks to how much power Dricus carries in his hands. This is not a perfect resume, but it sure as hell ain't bad for 185. 170 pounds has its king as Leon Rocky Edwards. Leon has a very impressive resume. Has he dealt with power punchers? Yes. Not only did he deal with a prime Vicente Luque, but he also dealt with a Kamaru Usman whose knees had failed him and now needed to learn how to punch. And when Kamaru hits people, it looks like it hurts. Has he dealt with a wrestler? Yes, he has. Fighting Kamaru Usman 3 times and getting the wins twice. I think we've seen that Leon Edwards can deal with a wrestler. Has he dealt with a submission threat? Again, yes, he has. And both Rafael dos Anjos and Gunnar Nelson were considered to be very dangerous when Leon fought them, and afterwards, people stopped thinking of them as dangerous. Has he come back from a losing fight to win? Yes, obviously. We know Leon Edwards most famously for his head kick KO of Kamaru Usman Never forget that he lost every second of that fight up until then. Just the heart of a champion, you know? And this is another division where you have a couple of guys kind of locking it down. His last loss was to Kamaru Usman, and his best win is against Kamaru Usman. Usman is basically done and out of the division, so Leon has moved on past that and has shown that he's able to deal with every style of fighter in this division. Pretty much a perfect resume, especially when your last loss is something that you've already avenged twice. And now at 155 pounds, we are on to the mighty Islam Makhachev. Let's have a look at his resume. Has Islam dealt with a power puncher? Yes, he has. I'm willing to say more than one. In his last fight, Dustin Poirier, definitely a power puncher. Going down the list, Charles Oliveira has power in both hands. Bobby Green has power in both hands. Drew Dober does. At this point, I think we can acknowledge that Islam can deal with a power puncher. Has he dealt with a wrestler? Yes, he has. Both Volkanovski and Arman Tsarukyan wrestled with Islam. And even though Islam did not always get the better of those exchanges, he was capable and he still won both of those fights. Can he deal with a submission threat? Absolutely. Charles Oliveira is the number one submission leader in the UFC, and Islam Makhachev tapped him out. Now, the only area where we have any sort of doubt with Islam is, can he fight his way back from a fight that he is losing? Now, this is kind of like Tom Aspinall. Islam just has not been put in a lot of tough spots. Aside from his one knockout loss, his one professional loss that we'll get to, he really hasn't been put in that much trouble outside of the first Volkanovski fight and his fight with Arman Tsarukyan. This may suggest that Islam is actually a little bit susceptible to the wrestling, but we don't know that for sure, and someone would really have to push the pace on him for us to have that sort of a take. People think Arman Tsarukyan is getting real close to that belt, so that could be the fight where we actually see Islam get pushed, but that's yet to be seen. And speaking of that KO loss, Islam's last loss is his only loss, and it was a flash KO to Adriano Martins. Martins has not done anything impressive since knocking out Islam Makhachev, and Makhachev has not looked like someone that's going to be easy to knock out since, so not very worried about that. And his best win, I am controversially going to say Arman Tsarukyan is his best win. Islam has been dealing with what could be called an older generation of fighters that just refused to go down. Gatekeepers who kept that gate closed for a long time here at lightweight. And Islam has shown that he was better than all of them. But now, some of the guys from his generation of fighters are starting to work their way up. And Arman Tsarukyan getting that win over Charles Oliveira, well, that would show that these guys are probably better than this older generation of fighters. So I'm going to give his best win is Arman Tsarukyan. And I pretty much guarantee that Arman is going to continue to prove that that is Islam's best win. Getting into one of the most talent-stacked UFC divisions, 145 pounds, featherweight, we have our king, Ilia El Matador Topuria. What has he done as a very new UFC champion? He hasn't defended the belt yet, so let's go down the rest of that UFC resume. Has he dealt with a power puncher? Yes, absolutely. Josh Emmett is the division's most notable power puncher up until Ilia Topuria got involved. Over 5 rounds, he was able to outgun Josh Emmett and pretty convincingly show that he can deal with a power puncher. But you know what he has not shown? Ilia Topuria has not shown that he can deal with a high-level grappler. He just hasn't fought one. And the only high-level wrestler that he has dealt with didn't get a chance to wrestle. Volkanovski was knocked out before he really got that going. Has he dealt with a submission threat? Yes, absolutely, and more than once. Not only was he able to submit this jiu-jitsu ace, Bryce Mitchell, but he was also able to knock out Ryan Hall back when people allegedly didn't want to fight Ryan Hall. Well, Ilia Topuria showed that you could just knock out the guy diving on your legs. Very effective, and he's dealt with those submission experts. One more, has he dealt with trouble and come back to win a fight? Yes, absolutely. In his fight against Jai Herbert, which he wins by knockout in the first round, he eats one of the most flush head kicks imaginable, is rocked immensely, and comes back to win that fight by KO. He's shown he's got the heart. Now, this is the first fighter in our little review here that does not have a last loss, because Ilia Topuria is the only undefeated UFC champion currently. His best win, I think, is easily Alexander Volkanovski. We're 1 year separated from Volk being the pound-for-pound #1 UFC fighter, and Ilia Topuria made it look easy. Not a perfect resume by any stretch of the imaginations, and Ilia Topuria probably is going to get tested by Max Holloway in a way that he was not by Volkanovski. But I'm still saying that's a pretty good resume. Time for things to get very light because we're moving down to 135 pounds with our champion, Sugar Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley has done a surprising amount with how much kind of hate and doubt that I think he gets online. Has he dealt with a power puncher? Yes, absolutely. Now, I was on the side of people who thought Petr Yan won the fight against Sean O'Malley, but to ignore the fact that he was not knocked out and in general wasn't actually rocked by Petr Yan, I think it shows pretty convincingly that Sean O'Malley can deal with a power puncher. As for a wrestler and a submission threat, the former champion, Aljamain Sterling, is known for his wrestling and his submissions. Now, he wasn't able to get any of that going against Sean O'Malley, but that's not because he didn't get a chance to try. It's because as soon as that fight started, Sean O'Malley started to line up the perfect punch. And if you're not even going to get the chance to shoot for a takedown, I don't know if you can even argue that, oh, he hasn't fought a wrestler. Because Aljamain Sterling is the wrestler in that division, next to maybe Merab Dvalishvili. But those guys are from the same camp, and Merab has always said Aljo was the better guy in the gym. So it's really hard to not give him the credit for having dealt with a wrestler and having dealt with a submission threat. Now, the one area where I think people really want to give Sean O'Malley some heat is in the heart department. Can he come back from a fight where he's losing or where he's running into adversity? I would argue yes, and I go back to that Petr Yan fight because too many guys just fold when Petr Yan starts to build. One of the all-time greats, Jose Aldo, even did. Sean O'Malley did not. He persevered. He fought through. He got that split decision win, even if I thought he lost. It showed that he could deal with these sorts of problems. Now, his last loss was against Marlon Vera, and it was due to an ankle injury, basically off of a low kick. Marlon Vera caught Sean O'Malley there, but we really can't count that loss for much considering that Sean O'Malley gave Marlon Vera the title shot just so he could whoop his ass over 5 rounds, and that's exactly what he did. Like I always say, if your last loss is a fight, like it's something that you've already avenged, it really can't be held against you. And his best win, I think, is easily Aljamain Sterling. He made it look easy. He dethroned this dominant champion, and he did it in no time flat. Sean O'Malley very strangely checks off every single one of my criteria. And finally, moving on to our very lightest men's weight division, 125 pounds flyweight, our king, Alexander Pantoja, the Cannibal. Has he dealt with a power puncher? Yes, which is surprising because we just don't have that many power punchers at 125. Who did he fight? Manel Kape, and he neutralized that power throughout 3 rounds. Has he dealt with a wrestler? Yes, obviously. Flyweight is the division of grapplers. Down at that weight class, it's harder to knock people out, but it's easier to throw people around when you all weigh only 125 pounds. Yes, absolutely, Pantoja has dealt with a wrestler before. Submission threat is the same deal. Again, all of these guys are grappling. All of these guys are trying to submit each other. 100% he's done it. Has he dealt with trouble and come back to win? Yes, again. Pantoja has this never quit style. He dropped rounds to Urseg in his most recent title defense. He got slashed with some serious elbows. Didn't deter him, did not slow him down, kept fighting, kept the belt. Just hard to deter. His last loss is to a ranked UFC fighter, Askar Askarov. That would be another wrestler in this division. That was a close fight. And frankly, Askarov has just not done what Pantoja has done since that fight. And his best win, I'm going to say it's Brandon Royval. Royval has looked very dangerous against a lot of guys in this division, and Pantoja has neutralized him and dealt with him twice. Now for a quick recap and finale to this video, I want to lay out who I think has the best resume out of all current UFC champions and who has the worst resume. As for the best resume, I got to give it to Leon Rocky Edwards. He has dealt with most of the serious threats in his division. He's now starting to look at rematches with guys he's already beat. He's just done it all in that division, and he continues to look amazing. As for the worst current UFC resume out of our champions, I'm giving it to our heavyweight interim champion, Tom Aspinall. Tom has just looked so much better than everyone else in that division. He's not been tested yet, and the skill set at heavyweight is so low that he's just never run into that dominant wrestler or that serious submission threat.
Hold on a second there, buddy. Where are all the women?
Next time.